Everyone. So we're going to continue with our other readings for this week, week 7, and we're going to go back into preventing misguided reading because it really is just crucial to really make sure that we're understanding what guided reading can look like now. Um, and it's such an important chunk. All of them are, but a really important chunk of your reading day, your literacy day. So chapter 3 talks about reconsidering text gradients. DeFord, Lyons, and Pennell, and Diane DeFord was actually my advisor throughout my PhD work at USC. So we had lots of conversations around this. A particular book may be appropriate for one child at one level, but inappropriate for another child that reads at the same level. And that is from their research in 1991, and it still holds true today. All texts on a particular level are not the same. I think this is one of the number one mistakes that teachers make when they're selecting texts from guided reading, and I don't think it's intentional. I just think that we were taught long time ago that if a child is reading, independently at a level J, then you move to a level K. You just pick out, a level K book. Or if a child's reading at a level 4, then you use a level 5 for their guided reading book. But what we weren't taught is just because a book is labeled as a level 5 or a book is labeled as a level J or whatever level it's labeled does not mean that they are all created equal within that same level. Lots of things to consider. So they talk about Birkins and Croft around from leveling text to leveling students, and this is a real danger. It's a consequence of using a text gradient that sometimes, we just can't help it. We use the same leveling structure to label kiddos. We'll say, well, Shaquan and Benjamin are both level Js, and Rita over here with Lysandra, they're actually level Ks. And even though we're not meaning it in a way that's deficient or bad, it assumes something. It assumes that a child is the level that they read. It assumes that those levels are discrete and all the same, and that those kids are only going to be able to read books in that level. A consequence of using a text gradient, assuming the growth of students will mirror the logical sequence of increasing difficulty of the gradient system. It's a mistake that we make. We assume that if a kid's going to read a level J, well, then next they're going to be ready for a K, and that there isn't any kind of gray area within that. Clay in 1991 said, "Fluctuations in performance, large leaps forward, movements backward in text difficulty are expected under satisfactory conditions of instruction. Movement backward in text difficulty can be a really hard thing for teachers to handle. They think that it means the kid is not moving forward or progressing or growing in their reading, when in actuality, kids will go backwards all the time because those levels are not necessarily, I just always call them, they're not discrete. They're not specific to just that level. There can be some fluctuation. So where does that leave us? Text gradients are a tool, and I've included, several text gradients within your modules and in this class, but they are only a tool. They are not the be-all, end-all. They are not the only thing you consider when you are selecting text. It gives you a skeleton, not the whole body, but a skeleton where you can organize your instruction, you can monitor how students are doing, you can engage in discussions around how this text is different in this level from this text in that level. But the challenge is to maximize the benefits of having a text gradient that helps you understand, well, how is a level A book different from a level E book, while making sure that you don't use those levels in a way that harms kids. So strategy 9 talks about viewing students' reading levels as a range or a cluster. Very often, kiddos can work within a cluster of 2 to 3 levels perfectly fine, and it actually really helps. It gives you flexibility in text selection. As the readers, they vary from one experience to another, and it really helps us focus on their process rather than just a level. It makes us more flexible with our groupings, which helps kids. If you come to your school's book room and, oh no, they're all out of level C's and I really needed a level C for this group. Well, let's look at level D books and find, quote, an easier one or one that's more able for them to digest, or maybe a harder level B book, because I promise you, they are not all the same once you start looking through. And it's also really important to help parents understand this, that a kid will be working within a cluster of levels, because we don't want them to view it as moving backwards either. Employing flexible grouping is another strategy. When teachers really think more broadly about text gradients, it helps you be more flexible when you're grouping kids. Again, we don't want to do like a red bird, blue bird, buzzard group and kids stay in that group no matter what. We want to be flexible. Sometimes when you work with students a little above or below that targeted level, it can be a really effective decision that you are making as a reading teacher, because you're not just thinking about the level, you're thinking about the student's reading process. What are they showing you? It's not just about the number that's on the book. It's about where a child is in their reading process, which is what we're going to talk about a lot this week. What strategies are they using? What are they not using? And what kind of book can we select at a certain level that will help practice that smoothly operating system? Strategy 11 talks about engaging independent students in tasks with scope. So when you're thinking about your 2-week plan, and there is the part of your 2-week plan where you are thinking about your lessons, the 2 weeks of lessons. One part of it is thinking about, well, what are the independent students going to be doing while I'm meeting with these small reading groups during independent work time? And so the use of literacy centers and workshops can be a little tricky, because what we're trying to constantly balance is having tasks that students can work on independently, right? And not interrupt you while you're working with these small groups of students in guided reading. But at the same time, we want the instructional rigor of those tasks to be high. We don't want it to be busy work, because that's just wasting time. I mean, as Rich Valentin has told us, we don't have the time to waste with kiddos. The Daily Five, if you're not familiar with that, offers some really good specific suggestions for building students' independent reading stamina when they're reading on their own while you're meeting with guided reading groups. What we really want when we say tasks with scope is from Clay. It's tasks from which students can benefit regardless of their reading level, and where the tasks themselves are differentiated inherently. And it really requires kiddos to attend to the work that they're doing independently for longer and longer periods of time. So some examples of tasks with scope: rereading big books. We talked about that a little bit when we discussed shared reading. Writing a story based on a pattern from a shared text or a guided reading book. That does not, being able to do those two things has nothing to do with a child's reading level. And it is inherently differentiated, because the story that a child who is reading level C, D, and E books may be very different from the story that the child who is reading level, H, I, and J book. Independently reading from a browsing box, or using magnetic letters to make new words from a common rhyme. So maybe they're making, new words with the IGH rhyme. That could be one thing for one child, while another child's working on the, ATE rhyme, and they're making new words like late and mate and rate. Tasks without scope always concerns me when I come into a literacy classroom, because I think of two things. I think, well, these kids are really engaging in tasks that are keeping them busy, but not necessarily growing them as readers and writers. And also that eventually, it won't take long, the teacher is going to be dealing with some engagement issues, which typically manifest as behavior issues. And that's one of the times the teacher really doesn't want to have to deal with behavior issues because of lack of engagement. So these right here, I've seen them, and they're tasks without scope. You're basically setting yourself up as a reading teacher to be interrupted. If your independent learning time during your workshop has tasks without scope. Another strategy is to linger at level E. Level E is around a level 8 in some benchmark systems. It's a critical point. It's something about level E where students either, boom, they take off. They've got that self-extending system, they're integrating their processes, and they've got it, or they struggle. There's something about a level E text that really requires kiddos to bring those two print processes and meaning processes, story processes together. So I always tell teachers, when you've got kiddos who are working around level E, which is like 6, 7, 8, take your time with it. Make sure they've got it. Because once they get past level E, they really have to have that integrated system to continue doing well. They're basically having to just do the same thing in harder and harder text. I've always told teachers that kiddos who don't have it at level E, you're just going to keep struggling as they move forward. So before you get to E, even if you're in levels A, B, C, D, or ones, twos, threes, fours, be strategic about making sure kiddos are as independent as they can be, integrating what do you see with print, with what do you know makes sense, and then just spend enough time right in that cluster to make sure kiddos are ready to move forward. Strategy 14 is all about language and what kind of language you are using and what we are communicating to kiddos about what we believe about them. So many times I've heard, I need my E group to come over to guided reading. You're basically telling everyone in that classroom what level those kiddos are reading at, and you're labeling them as that level. Really not necessary to say that. You've worked so hard on your reading and made so much projects. I've moved you up to the next level. I've heard teachers do this as well, and they're trying to celebrate a kiddo's progress. But what does that implicitly tell a child? It implicitly tells a child you are celebrated for the level of reading that you're doing, not for the strategies you're utilizing and the process that you're showing. So look at the difference in this mindful language. Let me tell you what you've noticed. When you get to a word you don't know, this is what you used to do, and this is what you do now. Do you see how saying, oh, you've moved up to the next level doesn't really give the kid anything to celebrate except for moving up in difficulty? While this kind of language tells the child, wow, your processing system is improving. Let me show you how what you're doing now can then take you into, yes, the next level. Your child is a D when you're talking to parents, really limits that kid. Using this kind of language, especially around the strategies. I would constantly talk to parents. Yes, they want to know what level their child is reading at. And I would tell them, but then we would talk about strategies. Here's what they're working on with me. Here's what you can work on at home. And instead of calling a group a low group, like there is no such thing as a low group. They're just kiddos who are either struggling with confirming print cues, or maybe they're too story dependent right now. Thinking about that, thinking about their process, instead of thinking about the level that they're at, can be much more useful language. All right, so I'm going to stop this video here so that we can move into the next chapter, chapter 4, where we realign with balance.